Hi everyone, welcome. I'm about to move my outdoor worm bag over into the shade where we don't get these really harsh shadows. But every time I move it, I always expect to see a good number of worms hanging out right below it, so I figured we'd take a quick peek to see who's there today. Oh, they're not going to like that bright sunlight, that's for sure. I better collect these little guys up and get them into the bin for safekeeping. I guess I could always just return the container to where I found it. These little guys are probably better off in the worm bag anyway. Oh, here's one that almost got away. Alright. Let's get to feeding this system. So the stuff they're getting here today is visible on top of the container. There's just different types of kitchen scraps, all frozen in here, and I also have a couple of these old tomatoes from the garden, very similar to what they got a week ago. They got all the old, unripe, green, partially rotted, all kinds of tomatoes that were kind of on their last leg, but still good enough to be fed to the worms. Definitely not good enough to be fed to humans anymore. But I mean, it's even surprising that there's still a couple that still seem like they might have a little bit of hope, so they're still in the kitchen, probably just awaiting the chance to also become worm food at some point. So now this bin, wow, that's weird. Okay, now I remember. I just saw this unusual color item. I did peek into this bin a couple days ago to dump in some juice from some berries. It wasn't much. It didn't amount to a big feeding or anything like that, and it was dark already. I wasn't going to bring the camera out here to film it, but it does provide a little bit of an interesting berry scent down here in the bin. I hope we don't get too much interruption because there is a tree service working about 3 or 4 doors down on the neighbor's house, cutting down trees and also operating a big wood chipper over there. So they're going to be grinding up trees and making a racket over there. So we'll see how it goes out here. Maybe I should just get this feeding done as quickly as possible. Dump in all those frozen veggies and those rotting tomatoes. And I got my grit from down in my wormery too, so we can include that in today's feeding. But the one thing that's been going on here in this bin is that it just really feels like it's approaching its limit in terms of capacity. Yep, there goes the wood chipper. Not sure if it's coming through, but I'm able to hear it pretty good. I hope it's not disrupting your enjoyment of the video too much. But I've on a couple occasions come in here to give this bin a feeding and found that just to make a modest little hole to place the food into, we try using this outer perimeter to stack. Whoa, noise, sorry. Forgive the noise, please. We've had to stack up the materials around the perimeter, leaving very little room around the edge because we come right up to the very tippy top almost. And I'm already kind of worried about maybe spilling some of this stuff over the edge, so I don't want that to happen. This is an apple that's been in the system for something like 6 weeks now, I believe. And I believe the kiwi was placed in there at the same time. Both of them went in here frozen. And somehow they've been resisting infiltration for quite some time now. This might go back a little ways. Piece of asparagus. I don't think it was part of the last feeding. But I could be mistaken. I could just be mixing things up here. So I don't know if we're going to see any of the tomatoes we put in here last time. There were quite a number of them, so there might be leftovers remaining. Let's put these leftovers over here. I think I did submerge them quite deep down into the system. Looks like we also tried to include a little bit of carbon food to go along with the yummy fruits and veggies. But you know, a couple of the things that usually for me are the reason to sort of stop composting in a system and start driving it towards harvest is either because I'm simply out of space, which is pretty close to what I've got going on in this system here. Another thing could be that I'm just really certain that I know when I'm going to need my castings, and I need to like kind of time the predecessor activities so that it times out in such a way that I've got the castings when I need them. you could simply have rule of thumb, you know, and kind of in my wormery, a rule of thumb wasn't really set as a rule, but it was just sort of a pattern I was observing. But the 15th feeding in a lot of my bins is often the last feeding before I withhold any future feedings and start trying to steer the system towards migration and harvest. So basically migration of the worms out of the system so that the castings can be harvested. So I've definitely bumped into a few of these tomatoes that were part of the last week's feeding. So it's not like they need food, but I figured it was a nice enough day out here. It was a good opportunity to get outside and check on this system. And if this 15th feeding is going to be the last feeding for a while, the next step in my worm bins is usually the step that I consider to be foraging, meaning that the worms are just going to be left to, you know, eat whatever's left in the bin. And there's tons of leftovers. You can see stuff everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's a little scrap of bedding, a little scrap of leaves, a little chunk of leftover food. There's got to be tons of stuff in here that the worms could live off of quite comfortably for quite a while. Not to mention the fact that it's getting pretty chilly out here. It's probably no more than 40 degrees Fahrenheit here today. But it is sunny, making it pretty nice to be outside. But I did have to dress up. I got a sweater on, plus this flannel. My gardening flannel. So I think today might be our last check-in for a while. If we're going to just let this system forage, there'll be a lot of stuff for them to work on in here, and they'll have plenty of time to do it. And unfortunately, I believe their general rate of decomposition, of breaking stuff down, their feeding intensity seems to drop a little bit when the temperatures drop. So even though this population may have been able to consume a good large amount of food a few months ago in the summer, it might not be something that they can pull off now that it's winter. Technically it's winter now. First day of winter was yesterday, I believe. First full day of winter. So these worms are either destined to live outside all winter, like I've done a number of times in the past, kind of my overwintering experiments, but I've been really tempted lately to see if I could round this population of worms up, or at least a good number of them, to potentially bring inside and start a new worm bin inside. So just one of the ideas I've been toying with. We'll see where that leads, but for now I think we've created a sufficiently deep pit here to drop today's food into. I think we'll just drop some of the old stuff that we excavated in the process of making the hole. We'll drop that in on top of the fresh foods. I just feel kind of bad because this stuff definitely came out of the freezer and it's cold, it's freezing. A lot of times I just kind of go on a leap of faith that the worms are capable of evading freezing temperature stuff around them if it's going to hurt them, that they can't just be really seriously harmed by this stuff. But just to play it safe, I think I'm going to plop in this filter here, at least a minimal block between any worms that might be right below the food and the food, because the food's just going to go in as it is. On the other hand, you know what? There was also 3 objects in here within the feeding supply that are not frozen. There were these 3 nasty tomatoes that never made it into the freezer. So perhaps if we lay these things down on the bottom also as a shield to protect the worms from the cold, then maybe we can avoid any potential harm that could come to the worms as a result of placing frozen stuff on top of them. So whatever, can't be perfect. Some worms might actually end up touching frozen stuff, and I just hope it doesn't lead to bad things for them. But that is a pretty generous feeding now that I see it in the bin. And as this stuff eventually thaws, if it thaws, at this point, who knows, I'm sure it'll start to kick off a good amount of moisture in here. Not that the system needs moisture, because it feels plenty damp in here. But the worms always like dampness, so they're not going to mind if it occurs. So the only things I figured I would try to position at the very top, just in case we wanted to check in on them at some point in the future, are these weird pieces of fruit that have been sitting around in the worm bin here for a month and a half already and hardly show any signs of wear. I mean, this apple you know, it's mushy and everything, but I don't see worms going crazy gobbling it up. And this kiwi I thought would be a major hit because it's kind of like all gooey and squishy, and I assume it's all full of sweet, delicious goodness. Damp, gooey internal flesh of the fruit. Oh, here we go with more noise. So maybe I could just gradually backfill this container here. This is usually fun too, because all the worms that we pulled out on the way in, we get to see on the way out. So as we prepare to finish things off here in this system, we can bring back in all this worm-rich material, back in over the contents, level things off, see if we can take any of these food chunks that are sort of floating out here on the surface and get them down into the material rather than having them float out on the top of the surface. This must be some yummy morsel of food because there's a good number of worms hanging out by it. So I don't know, I've got to make a decision on what to do with these worms. If I want to recruit some of them for another internal bin, do I want to go through the hassle? Sometimes I feel like I'm bringing in all kinds of weird unwanted creatures from outside that don't really belong inside. But then again, in the cold now, maybe the worms are the only creatures mobile, and maybe I can just leave all the other creatures behind if I were to grab worms out of here. You know what? Once again, I got my grit and I forgot to apply it. You know, if I didn't forget stuff, it wouldn't be me, right? Maybe just to get it down in here, maybe I'll put a little sprinkle of it, but you know, at this point I've probably applied grit to this system numerous times in the past, so they'll be fine without it on this occasion. And they probably would have been just fine if I'd never put any in either. Some people will argue that it's not even a strict requirement, it's kind of a nice to have, but the worms can certainly get by without it if it's not around or not available. Alright, so let's start getting this thing back to the way we found it, covered back up with this piece of paper that we came very close to replacing last time. I have another piece of paper just like it, but the way I cut it, it's too big to fit in here, so it seemed like I would use that elsewhere and just keep going with this one here, although I do have another small one that I thought I might put in here in conjunction with this one, so why don't we at least do that and treat that as like a little extra insulation for these little guys, and then we'll be done. Okay, so the piece of cardboard that I had in mind for this is actually the piece of cardboard that goes underneath the pizza pie. So this is part of the box itself right here. So this is the piece that goes right below the pizza. Not from the same pizza. This is from a pizza from many months ago. This is from a pizza that I just had a couple days ago. But this will now go in here as a little extra insulation on the top, onto which we can restore the highly secure piece of plywood that really does a good job keeping invading creatures out, although once in a while I do see evidence of something trying to poke around in here and see what's inside, because sometimes I'll find little signs of excavation with little bits of dirt kicked up, not dirt, compost obviously, but still evidence of somebody trying to get in here to see what's going on, and luckily this thing prevents them from getting very far. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.